Okay, good morning, and welcome to our Bible study using the Chronological Study Bible. We begin today, we're still in Deuteronomy. We have ways to go in Deuteronomy. We will begin on page 202. It is the Epoch 3, which is the era 1500 to 1200 BC. And in the fourth chapter of Deuteronomy are listed the Ten Commandments. Fifth chapter, I'm sorry. Yes, fourth chapter is very short. It is the introduction to the law. And it says, this is the law Moses set before the Israelites. These are stipulations, decrees and laws Moses gave them when they came out of Egypt and were in the valley near Beth Peor, east of the Jordan, in the land of Sihon, king of the Amorites. And last time we talked about that we remember that the Amorites were early on big players in this area, and that they were the people who started the cities, and they had a lot of things like that. What this happened is that over these many generations, they became extremely strong. So then he lays out the land that will be the promised land. So in chapter 5, Moses summoned all Israel and said, "Hear, Israel, the decrees and laws I declare in your hearing today." And then he goes on to say that our Lord our God made a covenant with us at Horeb. Now remember that, again, let me say that Deuteronomy is mostly long speeches by Moses retelling the history of the Israelite people. And he's doing this because they understood and didn't have the books, so they did telling of stories. Over and over they told these stories. So he knows that he has to tell them, and they are about to go into the promised land. So it's very important for him, on behalf of God, to remind them of their history. So the Lord our God made a covenant with us at Horeb. It was not with our ancestors that the Lord made the covenant, but with us, with all of us who are alive here today. Remember that God killed many people who did not have faith in him and who had idols and things like that. He killed them right where they were, in the land where they were, and then sent the rest out into the desert, in the wilderness, where they wandered for 40 years. So now we're coming to sort of that climax. And now before they go over, this is sort of, in some ways, this is Moses' last hurrah. He's going to tell the story again. And so at that time, I stood between the Lord and you to declare to you the word of the Lord, because you were afraid of the fire and did not go up to the mountain. If you'll remember, that's not exactly how it happened. God called Moses to come up to the mountain. You remember that? And said the other people will stay. So I'm saying this to say, here's an early example of a religious figure, preacher, whatever you want to call him, massaging it a little bit. Massaging it, even Moses, who's saying, you didn't want to come up. The truth is, if you go back, God said, you may not come up, only Moses can come up. Recall that? So, said, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself any image. And then it goes on and on. And then it says, for I am the Lord your God. I am a jealous God. We're going to come back to that. Punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me. So he's going to punish up to the third and fourth generation. But then God says, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. Somebody with math skills here, I would say that would be Brian, probably. What were 1,000 generations from 1200 BC? Hard to do in your head. I get it. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. It's. Are we there?
No.
No.
Oh, no.
So here's God saying 3 and 4 generations will be punished. And then he's saying love to 1,000 generations. You can take it literally, and that's fine. I do too. But also remember that is God speaking in ways that we understand His greatness, His power, His mercy for a long time.
Well, he has two stipulations here. First, he says, love me, and then he says, and those who keep my commandments.
Yes, yes, yes. The interesting thing to me here is that he says, I am a jealous God. We've talked about this before in a little way, but here's where I stumble in this, and maybe you can help me, and George maybe can help me, but to me, jealousy, and we've talked about this before, other certain attributes. Jealousy is a human attribute, is it not?
Made in the image of God. So we're jealous because He's jealous.
But why would God, who is perfect in every way and the creator of all things and in charge of everything and can change things with a whim and a snap of a finger, rhetorically, can do all that, why would God ever put Himself in a position to even be jealous? Why would that be? There's sometimes I read, especially in the Old Testament, you don't read it much after you get out of these early books, but there are things where He's talking to His people saying, I am a jealous God, I am this, I am that. And Don is right that we are made in the image of God, and therefore, when I say it's a human attribute, well, that means that God had it and we got it from Him. We are His children. But my question would be, and I'll never get it answered because there is no answer to it on earth. And then when you get to heaven, you're not going to care because you're just going to be so happy to be in the happiest place in the world. They say Disneyland is the happiest place on earth. Well, heaven is the happiest place you could ever be. So I wonder why this even came up. And I would assume it's because he is trying to make a point. Good, thank you. I'm glad my theology at seminary took care of that for you. He's making a point by using terms, knowing that 2,000 plus years later, we're going to read this and we're going to understand what being a jealous God means. But it's still a little burr under my saddle that he uses these terms because, well, it goes back to original sin. Obviously, it goes back to original sin. God, think about this. It's a pretty big picture. I don't knock this down like I usually do. It is a pretty big picture. That picture is that God created and ruled and still does.
What I find interesting is you can't have jealousy unless you got love.
Yeah, I was going to say, who said jealous is a negative thing? It may be a positive attribute from God that we inherited.
Well,
How
it
you
doesn't
act
sound
on
like that in there.
How you act on it may be.
It doesn't sound like that on there, but yes, you could go down that road. But my point of all this is, what was the need God could have stopped original sin. Now we get to this talk that a lot of people have about free will. But free will wasn't so apparent in the Garden of Eden. He just said, you can do anything you want except this. And they did that. And I get it. But it's kind of like, well, I've had a stepchild, so it's kind of like your children. It's like you try to make it as perfect for them as you can make it, and you try to warn them, and you try to keep them, and you try to protect them. You try to give them love, and you try to show them happiness, and yet sometimes the choice is not the right choice to make. That's just the way it is. That's the way it is. So don't touch that stove. Don't touch that stove. I told you not to touch that stove. You know, it's that way.
I think he used a term that these people could understand. And,
It's a good point.
you know, what he's saying is, you are my people and I am your God, and you're not to create any other God or conjure up any other God or anything because I'm jealous. And that's something they could understand. I am your God.
Well, I can understand that one.
Yeah.
I just wonder about sometimes these terms in here that God uses that are human attributes,
Yeah.
and I just, you know, anyway. So it says, then you shall not misuse, in my version, or in this version, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. For the God will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Anyway, it goes on through the commandments. You know, you shall not murder, you shall not, we know the commandments, I hope we know them. And then it comes down to verse 22. These are the commandments the Lord proclaimed in a loud voice to your whole assembly there on the mountain from out of the fire, cloud and the deep darkness, and he added nothing more. Then he wrote them on 2 stone tablets and gave them to me. This is Moses talking. When you heard the voice out of the darkness while the mountains were ablaze with fire, all the leaders of your tribes and your elders came to me, and you said, the Lord our God has shown us his glory and his majesty, and we have heard his voice from the fire. Today we have seen that a person can live even if God speaks with them. But now, why should we die? This great fire will consume us, and we will die if we hear the voice of the Lord our God any longer. For what mortal has ever heard the voice of the living God speak out of the fire that we have and survived? Well, who was that? Moses.
Yeah.
Go near and listen to all that the Lord our God says, and tell us whatever the Lord our God tells you. We will listen and obey. So they're always, like all of us, most of us, saying, well, why is it necessary to go through this? Isn't that a question that you have sometimes? Like it is for me. God, why is it necessary that I go through? Why would you let this child die? God, why would this happen? You know, and then the answer is always God makes something good out of evil, something good out of bad. You've heard all of those questions and answers. There's sets of them, and you've heard them. And then he goes on to say, the Lord heard you when you spoke to me, and the Lord said to me, I've heard what this people said to you. Everything they said was good. Oh, that their hearts would be inclined to fear me and keep all my commandments always, so that it might go well with them and their children forever. So, keep my commandments, fear me, and it will go well with them. Don't, and it won't. Again, we go back to, why is it necessary that it not go well? Go.
Well, not to assume that I know what God is thinking, but if you don't have some kind of a life experience and have trials and troubles and sadness, how can you witness?
That's a great point. It's a great point. Good. That's excellent. So then he goes on to go tell them to return to their tents. You stay with me so that I may give you all the commands, decrees, and laws. This is Moses telling them what God said to him. Remember, this has already happened. So be careful to do what the Lord your God has commanded you to do, to not turn aside to the right or the left. Walk in obedience to all that the Lord your God has commanded you, so that you may live and prosper and prolong your days in the land that you will possess. Elsewhere it says we were given 7 times 70 years, whatever the phrase is. I can't remember the phrase right now. We're given, so he's saying longer, you know. So some places it's defined, some places it's not. Now, chapter 6, love the Lord your God. This is one of those big chapters. These are the commands, decrees, and laws that the Lord your God directed me to teach you to observe into the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that your children and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live by keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, so that you may enjoy long life and long life. Hear Israel and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you, that you may increase greatly in the land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord your God and ancestors of your God of your ancestors promised you. Now we begin something that's called famous in the theological world. It's called the Shema. The Shema. The Shema is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is the Shema. That is the way that they called people together. It would be their collect. Like we have a collect every morning. Think of it that way. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God. So let me change to some information I've found. The Shema. Chapter 6 contains one of the most significant passages in the entire biblical revelation. An injunction so fundamental that the recitation of it twice a day has been part of Jewish practice for nearly 3 millennia. I'm speaking, of course, of the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. And we say it. We say it. We remark in the first place, it says, Abraham, hearkening unto the voice of God, was the manner in which the entire Israelite experience commenced and unfolded through a long series of hearings, acts of attention on the parts of Jacob, Joseph, and Moses. So Abram started it when he became Abraham, you recall, and then it became Jacob, Joseph, and Moses. So up and down the ages, the summons goes out. Listen, it is echoed as well in St. Paul's dictum in the letter to the Romans to the effect that faith comes from what is heard, in Romans 10:17, and in the 2 millennial long tradition of Christian preaching to the new Israel. New Israel, we're the new Israel. If you ever hear that phrase, that's us, which is the church, they call it. The church is the new Israel. It says the fundamental problem is listening exclusively to one's own voice. The solution is attending to the transcendent voice of God. Instead of listening to your voice, hear, O Israel, the Lord your God. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. Then we say, this is the first and great commandment. Love your neighbors yourself. We say it every Sunday. So the Shema identifies God as the one who spoke to Moses out of the burning bush. That was in Exodus 3. Now, here's the interesting part of this. I'm going to skip here. It says, as creator of every existent outside of himself, as a sheer act of to be itself, God is supremely one and incomparable. No conditioned reality, however exalted, can compare with God, since God is the one who fulfills the reality's conditions. The one God is the source of actualization for anything that stands outside of him, and hence he is Lord alone. It is from this ontological claim that the moral and spiritual demand placed upon Israel follows: you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. So that's sort of snooty there in saying it all. But what it's saying is everything evolves from God. So there can be no other God, because no other God created God. Does that make sense? It sounds, but you have to come to that to say there can't be a God outside of God, because he is the creator of all. We say it every Sunday in the last gospel. I say it every Sunday. The Word was with God and was God. In the beginning was the Word. In the beginning was the Word. In the beginning was the Word. That's why we say it. It's to remind all of us. Is that my phone or your phone? That must be my phone. Making millions of whatever. We say it every Sunday to remind ourselves. In the beginning was, what is that? That's not, what is that? Okay, so it'll be one of those days.
The ain't of
Could
God.
be an Amber Alert or something.
That wasn't an Amber Alert. I think that was a warning to me, watch out.
Yeah.
But this is very important, very important. The Shema is very important. And the Jewish people still say it, and we say it every Sunday in a different way. But hear, O Israel, I am the Lord your God. But it's important to understand this, what I read that was so kind of complicated. I'm trying to break it down to the bottom thing. Not false, the bottom thing. The bottom thing is how God is saying, how can there be a God other than me when I created everything? If I'm the creator of everything, then there is no other God but me. So people who worship these other gods, they're not true gods. There's only one God. Hear, O Israel, I am the Lord thy God. Okay? So we have to, when we hear about people that do these other things, have these other gods, and take the the people in the Mideast and all of those people, they're taking people that God created and they are making them a God. That's not the way it works. Hear, O Israel, I am the Lord your God. Thou shalt have none other gods but me. So I just want you to keep that in mind, that God is the Lord alone. He stands alone. God stands alone. If God created everything, how could there be anything that is equal to or above him? There can't. So when you run into people who talk about these kinds of prophets, these kinds of people that they, just know, you don't have to take them on. Just know that that God created those people that they have exalted to be more than they are. They've taken a prophet. They took somebody. It would be like saying Moses is a God. No, Moses was not a God. God created Moses. There is one creator. Everything else is under him. So the protection we have in our hearts and our minds and our souls from going off on a tangent and getting hooked into, let's say, the Branch Davidians is something you all know. That guy at the Branch Davidians, whatever his name was, David Koresh, or he's mentioned that. David Koresh. He was they considered him a prophet, but he was created by God and God alone. So just keep that in mind. And so then it goes on and it says, when the Lord your God brings you into the land he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who were called what?
Patriarchs.
Yes. Good. Just want you to remember that. To give you a land with large flourishing cities you did not build, houses filled with all kinds of good things you did not provide, wells you did not dig, and vineyards and olive groves you did not plant. Then when you eat or are satisfied, be careful that you do not forget the Lord, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Wow. So that is talking to us as well. Please remember this. This is us, not just the Israelites. This is us. This is God saying, when you do this or that or the other based on something else that has already been done, don't forget it wasn't you, it was me, God, who went before you. He went before all of us. There is nothing that we can have in this world that God did not provide. I don't care how great a businessman you are, a businesswoman. I don't care what a loving parent you are. I don't care how big your house is. I don't care how nice your things are, your car, whatever. There's nothing you have, nothing that God did not provide. Does that make sense to you? You obviously are shaking your head. You agree with that. God bless you. But that's important to remember, because as humans, I always worry about the humanistic part of our lives, you know. So as humans, we tend to think, we fall off that, and we tend to think, gosh, I was so smart, I made so much money in the stock market this week. Wasn't I smart? You know, that guy wanted me to invest in this, but I said, no, we're going to invest in that. And I made all that money. No, you didn't make anything. God helped you make it. God was behind you making it. Even to the point that people who do not follow God do not understand that God provides for them. Now get your head around that. If God did not provide for them and they don't follow him, who would provide for them? Well, we would say Satan. But Satan is not God. We go back to what we were just saying. God stands alone. So God stands alone. So Satan can't do that. Oh, Satan can do lots of things, but he cannot be responsible for the way you have moved forward, the way you have lived, the way you've done. God cannot, so remember that nothing you have, nothing good that has ever come to you, no blessing that you have ever had has anything to do other than the fact that God has given you the intelligence or the heart to do things. God has given you those things. But it all stems from God alone. Hear, O Israel, I am the Lord your God. Hear, O St. Michael, hear, O Anglican Church of the Hill Country, I am the Lord your God. For me and my church, we will serve the Lord. Used to be me and my family, in my house, but I changed it. Editorial, but the point is, it's just very important for us to keep in mind that everything we have, we owe to God. And whether we have this much or whether we have this much, what we have, yes, Mark.
Question for you. Okay, so, God came to the Israelites. So then the Egyptians think he's not their God. He didn't say,
Go ahead.
Egypt, I am your God. He said Israel. So he separated everybody else except the Israelites from him.
The Israelites were God's chosen people. He brought them out of Egypt.
Right. So when we talk about the other gods, like
So,
the Egyptian gods,
that's right. They're not. They don't count.
but he left them. He forced them to that choice.
He did. You're right. You're right.
He forced them to that choice because he didn't take
Now
them.
let's take this. Let's take this. There are Christian Jews.
Yeah.
Believe in Jesus Christ.
Right.
They are Jewish. They have Jewish traditions. They do all the things, but they believe in Jesus Christ. They have taken that step. There are people in Egypt who are not Muslim, who are Christians. There are people in around the world, okay?
Right.
Just remember there are those people, and guess who those people are? They are what Bishop Dobbs used to work for, the persecuted church. That's what we call the persecuted church. When you hear that phrase, the persecuted church, you're talking about people who live somewhere, could be here, doesn't have to be over there, who, despite political pressure, despite the pressure of the government, despite the pressure of everything, Russia, wherever it is, they continue right here in our nation with the, yes, that's right, we're being persecuted. That's right. It's everywhere, but I want you to understand so Bishop Dobbs had a job where he went around and raised money to support these people, because a lot of these people, maybe not here so much, but a lot of these people are in these foreign countries, in Ukraine and in all these places, and they are worshiping silently in a house, in secret or in underground things they built and dug by their hands. and in other places, because they are the persecuted church. So his job, when he was hired to do that, was to raise money around the world. That's why he's been to Africa so much. It wasn't for us. It wasn't the diocese that sent him to Africa. He did this before when he was with the persecuted church, because he was raising funds and going over there and making sure the funds were used. And that was his job before he became a bishop. That was his job. So the people you're talking about, Mark, that are not Christian, people in those countries that are Christian are called the persecuted church. And they are people who hear God say, "Hear, O Israel," not Israel, but "Hear, O X, I am the Lord your God." Here, the trouble with the reason they're putting the emphasis on the Israelites is this, and God knows this is coming. God knows that his people will never believe that he sent his son Jesus Christ. So he has to shore them up in a different way than us. Hear, O Israel, I am the Lord your God, because they're the ones who fall into graven images, we say. They're, graven images, we say that in it. So you're right. And it happens here in America. It is happening here in America. It happens all around the world. It happens in China, everywhere, where the persecuted church, that's why when they ask us to give to the persecuted church, that's what we're giving to, are the people who are trying to live out lives as Christians under great oppression from their governments. And they are called the persecuted church. So, yes, you're correct. But the good thing is that there is the persecuted church. Think about that. What a blessing that is, that in places like Egypt, or places like Russia, or places like the Ukraine, or all those places where they're under great pressure by the government, there are people who are faithful enough. You see, they have martyrs because they die for it. We probably here in Kerrville, Texas, we're never going to end up having to die for our faith. We could, but we haven't had to face that much. But they face that all the time. And yeah, if they elect the same people too many times, we will. But having said that, we don't have to face that the way they do. And it's a horrible thing. So that's that. I just wanted to stop and bring that to you. And so it goes on to say, after it says all these things that you're going to inherit, you didn't get. So remember that I'm the one that provided them. So we did that. Fear the Lord your God, serve him only, and take your only oaths in his name. Do not follow other gods. And then he goes back to the jealous God. His anger will burn against you, and he will destroy you from the face of the land. Do not put the Lord your God to the test as you did at Massah. Be sure to keep the commands of the Lord your God and the stipulations, decrees he has given you. Then it jumps down to verse 20. In the future, when your son asks you, what is the meaning of the stipulations, decrees, and laws the Lord our God has commanded you, tell him, we were slaves of the Pharaoh in Egypt, but the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. Before our eyes, the Lord sent signs and wonders, great and terrible, on Egypt and Pharaoh and his whole household. But he brought us out from there to bring us in and give us the land he promised on oath to our ancestors. The Lord commanded us to obey all these decrees and to fear the Lord our God, so that we might always prosper and be kept alive, as is the case today. And if we are careful to obey all this law before the Lord our God, as he has commanded, that will be our righteousness. That will be our righteousness. That's the great sentence of this. If we keep the commandments of the Lord, and it's just as important for us right now, right here, this day, as it was in those days when Moses spoke to those people. If we keep the Lord's commandments, if we follow God, if we do all the things that we say we're going to do, that he asked us to do, if we follow all those 10 commandments, all the other things, the decrees, everything, that will be our righteousness. That will be our testimony. That will be our way of honoring God, who gives us everything. So what I'm trying to say is It's all connected. That's what I want you to do. See, it's all connected. We honor God by our following of His commandments. We have, we do that. We do other things, and then we know that God gives us everything we have. And when we do all those things together, that becomes our righteousness. And our righteousness is basically the way in that way we honor God. Isn't that great? So if you want to know how do we honor God, this is how you honor God.
Keep His commandments.
Keep His commandments. Keep His all the lessons that He gave us, all the covenants that He gave us. Keep all of that, and remember that we have nothing unto ourselves. We have nothing unto ourselves. We tend to think, especially in America, that because we are a society that builds and grows and has better jobs and better this and better that and better cars and all that we do all of that because we're smart, because we've earned it, because we have worked hard and we do it. No, we have nothing that is not God's, that He did not give us. Nothing. If you think you're the smart one that got it, I want you to explain that to Gates. Because he will say, I am the Lord your God, and I gave you everything. Even unto, what did He give us, the most important thing He ever gave us? Tell me. Jesus Christ. Who did what? And was?
Resurrected.
Yes. And sits at the
Right hand of God.
Yes. God bless you all. Thank you so much this morning.
I've
Thank
only
you.
been in church for 70 years.
Well, you just said it this time. Thank you.